President Donald Trump has slapped the whole world with tariffs, and the ripple effects are global. From Asia to Europe, there's hardly a country that hasn't been touched.
India, very, very tough. Very, very tough. Prime Minister just left. He's a great friend of mine, but I said, you're a friend of mine, but you're not treating us right. They charge us 52%. You have to understand, we charge them almost nothing for years and years and decades, and the other countries, and they all understand. We're going to have to go through a little tough love, maybe, but they all understand. They're ripping us off, and they understood it.
But a headline from the Times of India has captured the moment perfectly. It says, India gets slapped while others are punched. On that note, today we will unpack what these sweeping new US tariffs mean for India. With President Trump now imposing a 26% tariff on all Indian goods while calling us a tariff king, there's rising concern across sectors. But are we really worse off? Could India actually stand to gain more in this scenario? Let's find the answers with Economist Gaurav Choudhury. Hello, sir.
Hi. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much for joining us. So, first of all, the question that comes to mind is that which are the sectors that are better off, and which are the sectors that are actually not going to sustain with these new tariffs? If you could, just elaborate and give us an explanation sector by sector.
So I'll tell you, let's take a step back. And so what does India export and import from the US? It's
Okay,
important to analyze that, and then we can
right.
properly understand what's going to get affected and what's likely to get less affected.
Hmm.
India's primary exports to the US include pharmaceuticals, telecom equipment, gems and jewelry, petroleum products, gold jewelry, of course, and ready-made cotton garments.
Hmm.
On the import side, quite obvious, crude oil,
Hmm.
petroleum products, electric machinery, and aerospace components, and of course, airplanes too, because Boeing is one of the largest suppliers
Right.
to Indian airlines. Now, what are the hardest hit Indian sectors? So the tariff is about, as you said, about 27%. On the hardest hit sectors will be, in my view,
So actually, even this is quite confusing because the official data says 26%, but some reports say 27%.
right. So
what
it's
is
about
it
27% for India's electronics and gems and jewelry.
Okay.
And these are going to be the hardest hit. The reason is US imports nearly, or if I may say so, India exports nearly $14 billion worth of electronics
Hmm.
to the US annually, and about $9 billion worth of gems and jewelry
Hmm.
to the US. Uh, Before this, just to put things in context, why this is going to be the hardest hit. Before the tariffs came into effect or kicked in from day for yesterday effectively from India, for India, the tariffs, the import tariffs, if India were exporting for electronic goods, was only 0.41%.
That's quite low.
So, and for gems and jewelry, the effective import duty in the US for Indian exports was about 2.12%. From that level, there's a massive swing. For electronics, it's 26%, almost a 26% hike. And in the case of gems and jewelry, because it was 2%, almost to 24%, 25% hike, which means every time Indian gems and jewelry products land in the US, it will be 25% costlier, right, than the existing,
Right.
right? Every time Indian electronics land in the US, it'll be almost 27% costlier than previously.
Hmm.
So what does it do? It actually erodes India's, particularly electronics and the gems and jewelry, the cost competitiveness. Because Indian products, electronics and gems and jewelry, become costlier in the US.
Right.
So why would US American citizens, American consumers, buy Indian products, which are now 26% costlier?
Hmm.
So what does it hit at? It hits at the very competitiveness of Indian products, which is the price competitiveness. And this price competitiveness has got eroded not because suddenly there is a cost escalation of imports, or there is, suddenly the raw material cost has gone up, or something like that sort of thing. Nothing of that sort has happened.
Hmm.
And President Trump has erected a tariff wall. Now, if you want to land in the US, if Indian products, these products were to land in the US, they have to they have to scale the tariff wall, and scaling the tariff wall would mean that you have to pay an effective import duty of 26%, which makes your products costlier. And that, of course, affects the demand of your products. If prices go up, the demand will come down. When the demand comes down, it will affect India's domestic industry, that is India's exporters. Likewise for gems and jewelry, which is something that is why, if you see, it has affected those stocks significantly in Indian stock markets.
And so, will this will this cost and will this entire thing lead to any impact on the jobs and employment in these two sectors back home?
It could. There is a serious risk of job losses if this persists, because, as I said, when demand for goods go down, companies that are producing these
Right.
will curtail their supply lines or capacity lines. They'll produce less because there is less demand, right? When they produce less, they'll require less people on the factory floor. When they require less people on the factory floor, in the worst case scenario, they may have to lay off those people.
Right.
This could lead to job losses. To what extent this plays out is a matter of geostrategic negotiations that India has already engaged with the US, which it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. But clearly, these two, and gems and jewelry particularly, employs a large number of people, and there are hubs. Places like Surat, for instance,
Yes.
is a big gems and jewelry hub in India. There are hubs in South India. Those are, and there are, and they employ that sector as a whole employs a lot of people. It could affect jobs and eventually livelihood in the worst case scenario. I'm just flagging a caveat here. It may not play out that way, but in the worst case scenario, there is a possibility that there could be job losses that could happen in tens of thousands.
Okay, and so which are the sectors which are least affected or maybe not affected at all?
Interestingly, sectors that have been exempted from Trump tariff also includes pharmaceutical and energy exports. Collectively, they account for about $9 billion of exports to the US. They have been exempted from the new tariff structure. I mean, this is a bit of a relief, because Trump had earlier said that pharma industry would face tariffs, but there is still a possibility. While they may have got a temporary relief, you never know. In 6 months from now, a couple of months from now, there could be tariffs that could come their way too. The products exempt from import tariff in the US at this point include copper, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and lumber. In bullion, precious metals like gold and silver are exempt, but not gold and silver jewelry.
Okay.
Bullion is exempt. And in energy and minerals, certain energy products and minerals that aren't available in the US will also be included. Will also be excluded. So clearly, that is why when you refer to in your introduction that the Times of India said India got slapped while others got punched.
Yes.
It's a bit of a mixed bag for India. From India's side of the fence, there are certain sectors like electronics and gems and jewelry that got seriously affected. But there are others that have got exempted. So there's a bit of a relief in some sectors, but there's quite a bit of a hit in others.
Okay, and so with the negotiations going on currently between India and US, what are we exactly aiming for? And also, I'd like to ask this, that the Trump tariffs, they are a complete abrogation of the WTO rules. So going forward from here on with this entire tariff war, is this going to be the new way forward, where people will just try to crack a bilateral agreement
Right.
between countries?
So-
There's no any other alternative.
Yeah, so it's a good question, because WTO was supposed to be a multilateral, if I may say so, COP for the trading world.
Right.
Now, the world's biggest economy, which is the US, have taken a maximalist position unilaterally and said and imposed tariffs on multiple countries, which includes India also. And surprisingly, ironically, and actually quite unfortunately, the World Trade Organization, which came into being after years of hectic and detailed confabulations and negotiations among the world's trade ministers and trade negotiators over decades, is now standing as a mute bystander. It is just unable to do anything. It is like one member of the one country, which is the world's biggest economy, has decided to change the world trade order, and the trading COP just is not able to do anything. So it's like one person driving a car and deciding to break all traffic rules, and the traffic cops
Cannot
aren't
do
able to
anything
do
about
anything. That's perplexing, to say the least. And it also kind of says, goes on to mirror that probably WTO needs to be reborn again as something else. And right now, it has become the US versus the rest.
Yes.
And there are 140, 100, there are, about 150, 60 members in the WTO. All of them are waiting and watching, unable to do anything, even as their markets and their economy get seriously battered. Which is why I think it's about time that the silver lining, if I may say so, of all of this, that is that we could probably see this could trigger some kind of an initiative and a serious movement to build a new WTO in a new form, a born again kind of a WTO, which takes the world along rather than allowing just one country to ride roughshod with unilateral decisions.
Right. So another question based on this particular sector, which we call the backbone of our country, agriculture. So the U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, he mentioned in an interview that India is very protectionist when it comes to its agriculture sector. So should we, is it time to open up the agriculture sector to foreign players?
No, I don't think so, because see, and every time agriculture becomes a part of the world trade, any kind of a global trade discussion, this thing comes up, and the comparison is at best misplaced, at best less misunderstood, at worst misunderstood. First, we cannot compare Indian farmers with, say, American farmers.
Okay.
The reason is the Indian farmers are mostly marginal and small. The average land holding of an Indian farmer is about 2 acres or 2 hectares, not more than that. Whereas the average land holding of a farmer in a developed country would be 5,000 acres or so. So look at the difference in the scale of operations. Indian farmers, because they are so small and marginal, need state support, whether it's in the form of subsidy. Minimum support price, for instance, is a form of subsidy, but that's a subsidy that is required for livelihood and as a price support mechanism, which is nothing but also the income. Whatever the farmers earn by selling the produce is their income. So what we call price support is effectively in not necessarily in intent or design, but in terms of effect, is an income support scheme for the farmers. So that is required. So we have seen this. A few years ago there was this trade in the regional trade agreement that was being signed, and it was also initially India was part of it. It was called RCEP,
Yes.
and it was Asia Pacific kind of initiative, and India eventually India stood its ground, and very rightly so, because we cannot allow, just as an illustration I was saying, we cannot allow dairy products from New Zealand and Australia to flood India. Who does it affect? For consumers, it's fine. For you and I, who are not dairy farmers, it's fine. But who does it affect? It affects the dairy farmers.
Yes.
It affects their livelihoods. It's a question of livelihood. So, regardless of what the USTR may have said, it is in India's interest to protect the interest of its farmers, and number of such farmers run in millions. It's not in tens or thousands, and it's not just it is not just a political constituency. It is a very large number of people who draw their livelihoods from working on the farms, and that is why they need support in whatever form from the government.
As you said that this particular issue has been raised time and again at the international stage. So is that a good thing that despite the change in governance and the parties at the center, the protectionism that the agriculture sector in India has received has been commendable so far, and that's what's kept the agriculture sector.
I mean, it depends on how you look at which side of the fence you are or which side of the Atlantic you are. What the US may or Canada or someone else might call protectionist for Indian protectionist policies for India's farmers, it is life support for us,
Right.
or for our farmers. So I don't think they're comparable. It is like comparing a small, very small and medium enterprise with a very large corporation. You cannot compare that. As I said, the American farmers are far large in size. They can exploit economies of scale, and they can operate in large markets, global trade markets. Indian farmers cannot operate in global trade markets because they don't enjoy that kind of scale. And if you don't enjoy that kind of scale, you cannot have the pricing power in the global markets. And if you don't have the pricing power, you need to have someone to, and you need institutional support. That institutional support right now is from the government in the form of an income support. We might call it a price support, but it's essentially an income support. That is required. Now, I disagree with the fact, and every time it keeps on cropping up, that the India has protectionist policies so far as its agriculture is concerned. No, it's not protectionist. This is a support system for millions of India's farmers who live on the margins.
Okay, so last question. You see, India is the only country in Asia that has been probably slapped with the lowest
Yeah.
tariff rate. So, where does this leave us as a country in this new world order? Should we cheer this particular thing that we have been slapped by the lowest interest rate, the lowest tariff rate? So sorry, not interest. Or should we see this as an opportunity to tap new markets
So,
and move away from the US?
no, it's an interesting question. I'll give you an example. Let me respond to this by giving an illustration so far as Indian textiles is concerned. Textiles is the largest Indian employer in the organized sector outside of agriculture.
So actually, so sorry to add on to that. Textile is, I understand, the largest, but countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh
It's coming to that.
produce more
Correct.
than us.
So, and in all of this, there's an advantage for Indian textiles that is cropping up. It's for us to exploit. Vietnam, for instance, faces a staggering 46% tariff from the US in the latest tariff announcements, while Bangladesh and China are subject to 37% and 34% respectively. Now, look at the significance of textiles in these countries. Textiles in India contribute only 2% of India's GDP. It contributes 11% of Bangladesh's GDP and 15% of Vietnam's GDP. So the impact of the tariffs on textiles on the overall economy of India will be far milder comparative to the rest of the textile producing nations. Which is why I think if Vietnamese textile become costlier and Bangladeshi textiles become costlier, there's an advantage for India because the market opens up. People in the US will still continue to wear clothes. And if clothes and garments from Vietnam or Bangladesh or China are getting costlier, I think there's an advantage for India to actually appropriate the market that is going to open up. That is something that India should look at. I mean, if you look at China, for the overall export tariff to the US stands at 34%, Japan at 24%, Thailand at 36%, Malaysia at 24%, and Taiwan 32%, South Korea at 25%. Vietnam, hardest hit, 46% tariff. So the point I'm trying to make that all of this could open up new trade opportunities for India.
Okay.
Because it's if Vietnamese clothes and garments landing in the US as costlier because of the tariffs, it is for India to occupy that space. And finally, India is also how this plays out is going to be interesting because India is also negotiating a trade deal. It could first be a limited trade deal, or could be a full-fledged bilateral trade agreement. How this plays out is a matter of detail and time. We would not know. It's been a long-standing issue. Tariff disparities between India and US has been a long-standing issue. US is a country which India enjoys trade surplus. That is, US currently has a $46 billion trade deficit against India. Trump has made, and he had made this an election issue, and he's delivering so far as his own political constituency is concerned, and he's going to deliver on that. That is why he calls it in the liberation days, where American industry is going to rise again. Trump wants to completely wipe out this trade deficit and turn it into a surplus. Eventually, we cannot imagine a situation where countries are not trading with each other. There has to be mutual trade.
Right.
And negotiations among countries, or relationship among countries, are like, such trade negotiations are, if I may say so, like the hour hand of a clock. where if you notice, you will rarely see it moving, but eventually it moves. Right? It's not like the minute hand or the second hand of the clock. Trade negotiations are similar. It's moving at a pace that we will not probably see. But I would see next year, this time when we have a conversation, we probably could be staring at a very different set of conditions where India would have signed a trade agreement with the US and things would be very different. But
Right.
until then, we have to wait and watch and bear this pain.
Right. So, what about domestic policies in this scenario? What should we do to attract more foreign investment? And as the Prime Minister and the central government keeps pushing for the nation to become a manufacturing hub, besides MAGA, there is also Make India Great Again.
Right.
So, what should we do in that particular aspect?
So, Make in India, which came into it's 11 years, this September it completes 11 years. 2014 it was launched. The whole idea, it's an umbrella policy initiative. The whole idea was to turn into India into a preferred manufacturing destination
Right.
and a hotspot for global manufacturers. If you look at the last 11 years or 10.5 years, there has been some progress, but I don't think the progress would be to the extent that the government would be, probably falls a little short of expectations. Having said, also do keep in mind the 2.5 to 3 years was lost because of the COVID pandemic.
Yes.
The Make in India, as I said, is an umbrella initiative within which the government launched a PLI scheme, which offers various kinds of incentives to a set of select sectors. There is a fair degree of tangible investment that has come in. India should continue to remain very focused on turning itself into a manufacturing destination globally. We have seen mobile companies moving their plants here globally. Samsung is an example, and more lately, Apple has moved a large number of their mobile phone production to India. India is now becoming a very, very important global supplier of Apple phones to the rest of the world. Which are again examples of how India is moving up the value chain, or so far as manufacturing is concerned. However, I would still like to say that while we may have missed the bus on a manufacturing-led growth, we are a service-led economy.
Yes.
About 60% of our economy runs on services. 60% of our GDP is services, more than 60%. So if about 2/3 of our economy is is services, I think there is enough opportunity and enough promise and enough potential to also, kind of give the right set the appropriate conditions and give the right push to Indian services to continue to serve as the single most important engine of the country's economy.
Thank you so much, sir. If you have any questions, do let us know in the comments and we'll come back with a follow-up episode. Till then, keep watching The Indian Elephant for more updates.